What did your teacher do that you didn't realize until you were older was fucked up? When I was in 9th grade, my Spanish teacher had us pick Spanish names. I chose Jesus, but she refused to let me have that name, saying I looked like Antonio Banderas. So, my name was Antonio. Whenever we would take quizzes or tests, she'd walk the aisles, always stopping at me, resting her hip on my shoulder. Then on a Monday, she had a black eye. Before class, she and I were having a discussion about me turning in late homework. A fellow student comes in, goes to the teacher's desk and says, "Ms. blank. What happened to your eye?" The teacher looks at the girl, looks at me, and replies, "Antonio and I got into a quarrel over the weekend, and he hit me." What the fuck? After the Columbine incident, schools started to have all sorts of procedures set up in case of an active shooter incident. At my high school, we were taught, if an announcement was made over the par of a certain fake faculty member was to report to the main office. That was our cue to shelter in place, and take shelter in the classrooms. Once a year we had the drill, and every time it lasted about 5 minutes. We had a teacher though that was just a little bit off. I had him for a class during 8th period of my junior year, and as time went on, the whole class kind of figured he just was a very serious, quirky kind man. On one particular day, about 10 minutes into class, he tells us all to get under our workstations, because he heard the coded announcement. We all hid till the end of the period in our positions until the end of class bell rang. Our classroom was at the end of the school, and it was generally a quiet outside, so we never questioned whether this was a drill or not. This happened 2 more times during the year. We eventually just figured that he wanted to test us with his own drills. Looking back on it, and by talking to some of my former classmates, turns out he was faking active shooter drills to get the class to shut the fuck up at the end of long days. I've posted this before, but still. When I was in elementary school, our PE teacher had a policy that he didn't share with us. Apparently, it was his rule that girls couldn't wear skirts when we were in the gym. If you were wearing a skirt, he would hoist it up to make sure we were wearing shorts underneath. Most girls were not wearing shorts underneath, and he knew it. He did it to the girls, myself included, from kindergarten all the way up until 4th grade. 3rd grade teacher placed all of the boys in class on timeout and had tea time with all the girls for 30 minutes once a week. His reasoning, which he told us, was that boys were mean bullies and girls are nice and should be rewarded. This is one of a dozen or so things that the parents all documented over the course of the year. His first year teaching. Ultimately he was fired. My primary 5 teacher was a mad cunt. He used to launch blackboard dusters at students with proper force. It'd leave a dust trail in the air. You'd come into class some days praying you wouldn't get smashed by Halo's duster. He was physically abusive to one student in particular who had learning difficulties. The one time that sticks out most to me was when he grabbed said student by the neck, called him a pest and ignoramus. That was his favorite word, I swear he said that 20 times a day, and slammed him onto his desk. We came into class one day and the Führer wasn't there. We had subs for the rest of the year and he never came back. I learned years later that he himself had a breakdown and was now working as a public park attendant. When I was in elementary, my teacher wanted to show us a video about fire safety, but accidentally opened the wrong file. The whole grade of students cluelessly stared at one man and 3 girls in a hotel room for a few seconds before the teacher closed it. For me it was when my 5th grade teacher, during our unit on the Civil War, had us debate whether or not the South should secede. I know he was trying to get us to understand the economics of the war, but if you tell 10-year-olds to come up with reasons to justify keeping black people enslaved, they will come up with some pretty racist shit. I remember him pulling aside the one black kid in our class afterwards to ask if he was okay to tell him our classmates didn't really mean it when they said that, since black people are the color of dirt, it's okay to treat them like dirt. In the 3rd grade we used to say the Pledge of Allegiance, "You sir," every morning before class. Then one day the teacher said that the black students in the class didn't have to get up and say the pledge because they weren't really citizens. As a white kid I was jealous of not having to do it every morning, but as an adult I think it abhorrent. Mrs. Doobie, if you're reading this, then I'm surprised you're alive, you racist sack of shit. Grade 4 teacher spent days making our class memorize the lyrics to Simon and Garfunkel's Bridge Over Troubled Water, then had us sing it to her when she was stressed, often multiple times a day. She was replaced a few weeks before the end of the school year. Years later we learned she had a mental breakdown, which was the reason she was replaced. She never taught again. Almost 30 years later, and I still know that song by heart. Almost 30 years. Jesus, life moves pretty fast. My 4th grade teacher would stand in the bathroom door and watch us pee, because she said boys couldn't be trusted not to pee all over the walls and stuff. My 10th grade science teacher, a 60-year-old man who was never married and didn't have many friends, would hang out with students after school and go to student parties. He would even buy us alcohol, tobacco and marijuana. He was fired for trying to date a 15-year-old student. I used to have homeroom in the morning that was overseen by one of our PE coaches. Not the stumpy middle-aged coach, the young handsome, looks like he almost made it to the majors, coach. They adored him. I mean adored him. And they would all sit on his desk and talk to him and giggle at everything he said. Some of them started doing things like playing with his hair and tugging on his clothes. Before the end of the year, he would have multiple 15 to 16-year-old girls sitting on his lap over the course of the morning. At the time I just sort of laughed it off, if not a bit jealous even. But now I realize, holy shit. I found out a few years later, he had been fired from his previous school because he and the school nurse got caught banging in a utility closet. Not gonna lie, I'm kind of curious what ended up happening to that dude. He had a jar of punishments for whenever you broke one of the rules. Both the punishments and the rules could be created by the students, and if you broke the rules you had to draw a punishment. Rules included everything from insulting another student, to speaking out of turn, to forgetting a pencil. The punishments all centered on public humiliation. And because it was a class of high schoolers given almost full reign, every class devolved into nothing but trying to bait other students into being punished, or convincing the teacher they needed to be. Punishments included forcing students to get on hands and knees while pushing a penny across the room with their nose and saying beep beep I'm a Jeep. Performing the highly sexual Call on Me dance, requiring students to scoot up and down every aisle of desks on their butt like a dog while barking the whole time, or making one kid spend an entire class at the front of the room, facing the wall, wearing a literal dunce cap. I forgot a pencil one day and had to stand at the front of the room while every student in the class balled up a piece of paper and threw it at me. One kid threw an entire notebook. I then had to crawl around on the floor and clean up all the trash. The teacher ended up getting reported at the end of the year after I and several other students complained about it unofficially to a different teacher, and while he wasn't fired the jar of punishments was gone the next year. I go to a private Christian school. When I was in 1st grade, my class performed the traditional Thanksgiving play which reenacted the interaction between the Pilgrims and the Indians. If you had dark hair and dark skin, you were an Indian. If you had light hair and light skin, you were a Pilgrim. We also sang a song that goes, "Ay, Indians say yo-ho," and teachers would enforce dancing like a chicken as Indian rituals. Later in the song the Indians reply to the Pilgrims with pale face, yes. Also had a pet teacher who used to dress up every year as a big baby and he would hit people on the head and hit girls in the butt with his bottle. He got fired for writing love letters to students. In 7th grade, my algebra teacher got me some mints from Victoria's Secret because she knew I liked mints. I don't recall her buying anything for any of the other students. She also bent over in front of me a few times and was wearing a thong. At the time I was sorta like, hey, whatever. Now it's just kind of weird to think about. Also, my health teacher in 9th grade said that men couldn't be raped. Though this one I did realize was fucked up, and I almost flunked the class because I refused to listen to a word she said the entire rest of the time. I was back from spring break in high school and previous to that I had a suicide attempt. All my teachers were made aware of the situation, so arrangements could be made to help me with school while I was coping. During independent study in science class I was wearing one of my long-sleeved uniform shirts that had crept slightly, exposing a bit of my wrist. Nobody noticed until my teacher walked by and grabbed my arm and pulled my sleeve up and loudly said, while examining my mutilated forearms, "Wow, where did all this come from?" He knew what happened. That's how my peers found out too. 4th grade teacher pulled her chair out from under a mentally disabled student. She also told us a lot of really personal stuff about her marriage. I told my mom, and she had me taken out of the class. The teacher protested, so we had a meeting with the principal, wherein I told her all of the things I knew about my teacher's marriage. I got out of the class. I had a 2nd grade teacher, not my 2nd grade teacher, but she taught the other 2nd grade class in the adjacent classroom, who used to give students birthday spankings over her knee, and 1 spank for each year, so luckily we are only talking 6 or 7 spanks. After the final spank, you get a pinch to help you grow. Never got them myself, but saw it many times. At the time, didn't think much of it. Hell, kids thought it was fun. Looking back on it now, well, damn. You can bet that wouldn't fly these days. In middle school, I had a math teacher talk about statistics. Somewhere in there, he said that statistically, 3 out of the 7 girls in the class will be strippers at some point in their lifetime. He even had a joke about how all the boys were probably hoping it would be Tina, the hottest girl in the class, not a real name. Everybody laughed. We were actually miffed/confused when he was fired later. Looking back, all I can say is wow, how did I miss how wrong that was? This was a Catholic paid tuition school too. My grade 7 shop teacher had a bottle of Pepsi that, depending on how late in the day shop class was, would get significantly less Pepsi colored. Shockingly, he only had 3 fingers on one hand. Never heard a reason for this. Every time we asked there was a different story. My favorite story though was, a bunch of us were at the local burger shop. We were in high school at this point, and Mr. L came in. We got to asking him what he was up to now, and he told us he was teaching at the local composite school. If you got expelled etc you went to camp. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. It was Tuesday at 2ish. When we mentioned this, he grabbed his coat etc and ran out. He came back in 2 minutes later saying fuck those little bastards, and waited for his burger. The music teacher at my elementary school did all kinds of creepy stuff. The one that stands out for me was that every Easter he would have us do the bunny hop, except it mostly consisted of us standing still in a bunny hop pose while he came around to inspect our tails. We knew something wasn't right about him, but as kids we didn't really understand the full extent of the creepiness. It was just something to joke about. A bunch of parents finally complained to the school about him, and shortly afterward, he moved to a different school district, supposedly because he would be able to make more money from private lessons there. Yep, he offered private and home music lessons. A friend of mine took lessons from him briefly, and apparently he insisted on absolute privacy. While the lessons were going on, the door had to be closed, and her parents weren't allowed to open it. My younger sister had a teacher who thought improper fractions couldn't be simplified. I believe she was a 3rd grade teacher, but she teaches high school now. Those poor kids. I mean, she literally thought they couldn't be simplified. Like 6/12 equals 1/2, but 48/12, you were stuck there.